And just like that, another episode begins. Welcome to the Uncannery. I'm Doug.
I'm Ron.
I'm Don.
And we have much to discuss today about your grandmother's favorite board game.
Oh, perfect. I brought my notes.
Handwritten, I hope.
Parcheesi?
Yeah. That's another good selection. Yeah, Parcheesi is a good one. One of the oldest, actually. Do we know about the oldest board games in the world?
Is it War?
Talking about the 52 card deck of your card's higher than mine.
No, the geopolitical act.
One of my favorite games resulting in the deaths of millions.
I'm going to guess it's not chess. I feel like chess would frequently, like if this was a Who Wants to Be a Millionaire question, chess is on the board, right?
I get it on the board.
Regis somewhere right now is like, he's won $1 million. Yes, it would be the distractor.
It's the one with the rocks and the little holes that you count them around. Was it Mancala? Is that what it's called?
Oh,
Right?
yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Contender for sure. Yeah, there's some speculation around this. A lot of people will say it's a game called the Royal Game of Ur.
Yes.
Which I think was buried in King Tut's tomb. I believe in like one of the side compartments. Like he frequented this game enough that it was buried with him because he liked it so much.
I was at the British Museum once when we were in London, and they sell a facsimile copy of whichever particular model of the Royal Game of Ur they have in display there. And I was like, oh, sick, I'm going to buy this, and I'm going to have a Royal Game of Ur all my own. And it was too expensive. I was like, oh, that's a bit much.
Well,
You can be buried with it someday.
Yeah. Should have told.
on the last episode of the
investment.
Uncannery,
Yeah.
we buried Ron with a copy.
Bury me with my Game Boy and my copy of Pokemon Red.
Doug was upset because Pokemon Blue's the better one.
No, there's no
Donald.
sight there in that one.
The fact that you do that. Don only
Red all
played
the way,
yellow. That's right. Today we're going to talk about backgammon. We're going to talk about backgammon.
Oh, this is the oldest one. Oh, it's not? You misled us?
Yeah, it's definitely old. So backgammon, we're going to trace all the way back to the ancient Mesopotamian societies. We see that if we're familiar at all, if we're not familiar, let's get into it. We've got a 24-point board where these triangular shapes are drawn, and we use 15 checkers for each team that are racing around this board to get to the other side and be bared off the board. And the first person to be able to do that wins. And the reason I bring that up is if you think about simplest kind of forms of games that you can create, the thing that I find fascinating is like earliest inscriptions of this we find are like carved into things, so not quite like fossilized, but we see that this is carved into a lot of places. If you think about it, like you can make this in the dirt technically, and be able to pull 15 of one type of object, 15 of another. Some of the earliest pairs of dice that are carved into bones are surrounding this game. But yeah, this goes way back. We don't know if backgammon's the one. We do know it is older than chess, though. We do know that it's older than chess.
Do we know how old chess is? Like, do you have that information?
I was just going to say, unfortunately, I didn't do my chess research, but
I'm pretty sure Don has this in his brain. Don, can you think real fast? If you had to make a guess, when was chess made?
6th century.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, Don.
Quick.
You're welcome. Yeah.
See ya. This has been another episode of The Uncannery. Thanks for tuning in.
Don, can you tell me about backgammon?
My job is done.
Yeah.
That's it. Hopefully that was fun. So yeah, it's
So much earlier.
Yeah, much earlier.
BC.
Yeah, BC. And for obviously leading with it's your grandma's favorite game is probably not the most exciting way to bring this in. But the reason that this is significant is I was not expecting to ever do a podcast, let alone talk about with anyone for an extended period of time, the game of backgammon.
Because it's embarrassing.
Yeah, it's beyond embarrassing. It's my back tattoo that's a backgammon board, which the double pun of it being on my back. Really?
It says back, ellipsis, gammon, bro.
And I put, actually, bruh, just to bring it into the modern context.
So by calling it my grandmother's favorite game, is that supposed to be a pejorative or is that a compliment?
I consider it a compliment now because I think
Because my grandma was so cool.
Yeah. Love your grandma. Haven't met her, but I'm just going to send that love out right now.
Yeah. That love's going wherever it needs to get.
Yes. Careful. Looking at backgammon, I never expected it would necessarily be a topic that I would even bring to us, let alone a conversation that lasts more than 5 minutes. But
neither did we.
Yeah. Here we are.
This is minute 6 already.
We're deep. But I was shocked how enamored I was with it. Because my wife and I were recently gifted a set, which led to us buying a smaller magnetic set that we've been playing before we go to bed. And just strategically, tactically, just kind of getting obsessed with it and realizing like there's a lot more to this than I thought that there was. We for our listeners within the time, I have forced both of these gentlemen into a game of backgammon recently.
Yes.
Will you share your experiences playing the game?
I lost.
Yeah, I did too. Doug must cheat.
Yeah, I think Doug was
do.
just like, I just really need this today, guys. Can you play this game that I'm not telling you the strategies for? No, it was a fun game. I think.
And it was the first game you'd ever played.
It was the first game I'd ever played. Have you played it before?
I've played it before. Not obsessively like Doug apparently, but I have played it before. Yeah.
It was a game I always saw. I remember like there would always be like old people at family gatherings. Or, it's usually elder people playing backgammon in the back, and I never like. I would sort of watch and be like, okay, there's something happening here.
It was always cryptic though, because like there's no markings on the pieces. There's no directional arrows. There's no like it's not like Monopoly where there's literally arrows and icons and things to tell you what's going on. It's just a board of mystery.
Or like it like the spaces aren't like squares, which is like how most modern board games delineate that you are moving across the board. Right?
Yeah, and it's actually in some ways kind of counterintuitive because one of you is moving clockwise, the other counterclockwise around the board, which that can be kind of illusory for people at first of I'm going which way now? And so even though it's usually a pretty simple explanation in the beginning, there's usually a few hiccups along the way if it's not something that you're, kind of a natural at or have played a few times. But to me, it comes across very much, it's very sport-like in that you're looking at, kind of simple set of rules, easy to get into, hard to master, where it's like, mechanically, here's your field, here's your players, here's what you're looking to do. And within that realm, a lot of the strategy and tactics reveal themselves as multiple plays come in. But the fascination that I have is that it, at its most basic, if I were to describe it, is a game that's driven by dice. So you will have this element of random chance of that you're going to need to roll dice. There are going to be a certain amount of spaces that you can move. Sometimes you can't move them depending if a person's blocking you. And so you need to make decisions that are very tactical based on where these dice land. But then there's an overall strategy of how to position yourself. And I think that this is a very common theme that I see in like very classic games and sports is positioning is very important. And I think somewhere along the lines, I realized there was a lot more to it. But I just love that there was that little bit of luck that even though I can research the heck out of different tactics, or you can go on YouTube and you can find, there's a website called Backgammon Galaxy that does like a analysis. Sick, brother. Sounds really cool. You got a lot of friends?
I know exactly what that website looks like.
It's on geocities.com. Haven't updated. Says no. To be fair, they're pretty modern. They're still running the big tournaments that are around. But yeah, there's enough that people are doing statistical analysis of games that you can look at old games and kind of go through in the same way that you would with chess, which I think most people, if you think of like overanalyzed game, people are going to go to chess immediately. That would be my guess.
Right.
But backgammon has a very similar following. And you might think that that's strange. It's like, well, but you roll dice, so there's always luck involved. And What's interesting to me is statistically, we can see that the people who are consistently the best, that maybe will play 100 games, they'll win like a majority of those games. They will. They're just because if they're playing strategically the best way within the statistics of rolling, they'll do really well. But at a tournament, even somebody who's been a winner several times over because of the luck of those dice, you'll get some people who just happen to have a great game and we'll go from there. And that appeals to me. I like the fact that luck can swing your way, but you also can play optimally. Optimally.
Yeah. There's like that random chance element is what makes it accessible to everyone, right? Like,
yes.
And it also prevents it to a degree, I take it, from being completely figure outable, right?
Right. And I think that that's ultimately what makes games not as fun. Like once it loses that magic, if there's something going on here, I wonder if I'm going to win this one. The second that goes away, I think that a lot of times that's what kills games. And that's going to be something we talk about. I think if I were to survey a group of people, I'm wondering like what the sample size would be. I think that less than, generally, it's not going to be a very large portion of the population that's played this game regularly, if at all. Generally, like I find that most people that I've talked to have not played backgammon before, but have seen it. They're familiar with it.
Right. Everyone's heard of it.
Yeah.
That was me. I had never been close enough to play it or been invited to play.
Why is it still a thing then if nobody plays it?
That is what I'd like to talk about today, is if we're looking at this thing from ancient Mesopotamia that's shown up, that we've got some loose records of history. And a lot of this, I'd like to shout out Tristan Donovan, who wrote the book, It's All a Game. I'm taking a majority, if not all, of my information from this man today, who's done an amazing job of researching these different games. His book has been really fun to read because, I mean, everything from Risk to the Game of Life to Monopoly. There's 2 different chapters on Monopoly, these games that kind of have been a part of our culture for such a long time, where they come from, where they're headed, where they've been. He does a great job of looking at the context of like where they fit in our world and how kind of some of the untold stories. And so what I'd like to talk about today is we've discussed fads on this podcast. The Uncannery has talked about fads, but when some
would say the Uncannery is a fad.
Oh, hey man,
I'm just saying, I'm not me.
Come on, brother.
But someone probably.
Yes. To our listeners out there, you know who you are. You know this isn't a fad, all right? This is a lifelong cult. It's a blood cult that we're all in.
You're an uncannibal. Once you get in, you can't get out.
Or we eat you. Yeah. But yeah, I'm interested in this almost mythological status that it's taken of it's popped up so many times and it's become a sensation again, in a way that is really strange to me, because I agree. It's almost like, why wouldn't this have died out by now? Because it's such a simple game, but it continues to kind of show itself. And so if you'll allow me, we can start to get into the history of it, shall we?
Sure. I vote yes.
Okay. Yeah. If you'd said no, this would have been a short podcast. So I want to thank you both.
I don't really have a choice.
It means
I'm under contract. I have to be here.
Yeah. Our lawyers are standing by. So call in. Let's go back to the Romans, shall we? The ancient Romans.
Love the Romans.
Okay.
They're fun.
Yeah.
Why'd they have to invent dictatorship?
They play backgammon, but if you lose, you get eaten by a lion.
That's when you lose the game of Ludus Duodecim Scriptorum, you were often fed to lions, is not a fact. Yes, this was the game of 12 lines, which, as I said in the beginning, what are you talking about? Wasn't there 24 points in this game?
The Romans really had a knack for naming, huh?
Yeah.
I feel like I've kickstarted something like that before.
Is your copy of the game of 12 lines coming in? Yeah. I just drew it on a piece of paper instead of spent 300 on the Kickstarter. But eventually became tabula, the Latin word for board. The origin of all.
It's also a Middle Eastern salad.
Yeah. Yes, it is. And so we will be debating on which one is better on the cannery. I'm going with backgammon here. I think the Romans took it on, as with many cultural activities that they did, because this game was played for money. The game was found, boards were found carved into courtyards of many villas, in the ruins of Pompeii. There were pieces of art, including paintings, depicting men playing it in a tavern before getting into an argument and being kicked out by an innkeeper. Caligula stood accused of being a cheat in this game. His successor, Claudius, loved the game so much he wrote a book about it and had a board affixed to his chariot so he could play it while on the move. And Nero even reportedly gambled away enormous sums of money playing the game, which I don't think is a shocker to anyone, considering Nero's incredibly compulsive habits, like burning down his entire city.
Yeah, he's going to gamble.
It fits though, doesn't it? Like if there's going to be a game with like a simple, fairly simple to get into, but you can win some money on it, I think that it fits within the context of Rome fairly well. The Roman legions take tabula to every corner of the empire, including what is now known as southern Germany, France, and the Netherlands. And it even made it to the empire's northernmost frontier, north of Britain, where the locals took to calling it tables at this time. So we're still not into it being called backgammon yet. That comes later. But as legionnaires retreated home, this game begins to fade away. And I think this is interesting because when we played backgammon, did you feel like a certain sense of combativeness in it?
Yeah. There's definitely an aggressive element, right?
And for people who haven't played, if you ever leave a single checker on a point, it leaves it exposed that a person, if they roll the exact amount of spaces to land on that checker, you have to start that checker in the race all over again from the beginning, get it onto the board, and then race it around all over again. And I agree. It's very combative. And so I don't know, hypothetically, do you think maybe there's a connection here between these warriors and playing this game?
I do. I was going to bring it up. And I was actually just thinking maybe we should describe quickly how to play in case someone hasn't played before.
It's a great point. Why did I not think of this already? I think I got ahead of myself, didn't I?
Let's right now, let's speak all the characters and a link to a YouTube video that will teach them how.
Let me start with the ending. Let me do my best with this. And then, if I can get you to fill in, that would be great. So, backgammon is a game played with 24 spaces in which both players can potentially, through the course of the game, inhabit. You're set up on certain points.
And the spaces are those triangular shaped things that people have seen on boards, right?
Yes.
And they're called points.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. As play starts, one player is moving clockwise, the other counterclockwise around the board to try to get their pieces all the way around the board and off the board. And as they do that, they have to respond to rolling a set of 2 dice, which allow them to go that many spaces, as long as they're not blocked by a player who has 2 or more checkers in that space. If a player leaves 1 checker in any of those spaces or moves a checker and it's left solitary, there's an opportunity for the other player to potentially roll that exact amount that space is on and knock that person off and give them the opportunity to start their race over again. And strategically, this is great because the more that you can send a player back in the race as you advance forward, statistically, you're going to win this game. You're not able to start pulling checkers off the board until they are brought into the last 6 spaces of the race. The last 6 spaces closest to your home board. It's considered the home board. And then you can start bearing off checkers with the rolls that you intend to roll. The game is over when the player who has removed their last checker from the board removes that checker. And there are rules that we'll get into later about, depending on how far behind somebody is, you win more points if you're playing multiple games for how behind that person is, how dominant you were in your performance. And that's what leads me to think that these warriors enjoyed this so much, because you could be so dominant at this game potentially.
And there's other games that do that though too. Like in cribbage, you can get skunked or double skunked, right?
I haven't played cribbage. Yeah. What is that a fun one?
How does Board Game Boy not play cribbage? Wow. All right.
You said board game boy so condescendingly. Audience at home,
How
you
did
should
you
have
know
seen his eyes.
his AOL email name?
Board
his
game boy.
aim.
Hey, anybody interested in a classic game of tables?
Yeah.
I'm playing the ancient version. So
Go play cribbage, board game boy. Then we'll talk.
I don't know that one yet.
But I think you're right. There's like all of these confrontational games, like chess is an emulation of war, right? Yep. Checkers is as well.
Yep.
And so the fact that this board is set up where you are opposed to each other and you're moving in opposite directions, and there's that battle element of landing on the individual checker to kind of kick it back into the start of the race. And originally they weren't called checkers.
Don, what were they called?
They were called men. They're table men.
I was really hoping you were saying they were gammon, but
because the gammons have to go back. Yeah.
That's it. That's it.
So, but like so it seems to be an emulation of some kind of human activity,
right?
Because you've got little pieces that are named after humans, and it's less warlike than chess because there's not as much killing, right? And because when you land on that individual checker, you're not removing it from the game like you do in chess,
right?
You're just starting the game over.
Yeah.
For that.
And it's also mimicking less of a battlefield, right? And it's like presentation.
It's a kinder, gentler war.
Yeah. This is something I've always wondered, which is like, there are a lot of these like ancient, like even sometimes our modern sports, right? Football is supposed to be an emulation of a battle to some extent, right? And I've always wondered, like, how much is that true, and how much are we projecting that sort of image onto it? And like chess, very clearly, like all the pieces are sort of themed or warlike theme, right? But I sometimes wonder, like, is checkers really like and like backgammon also, like, are we saying this is like a game that emulates violent human competition or interactions, or is that just competition in general, right? Like,
right. It's interesting that you said, Don just said, this is the gentler version. I'm going back to our jujitsu conversation of it being a gentler martial art. But what is interesting about combat in general is the thing. It's interesting because people, until you go like combat, the first word I associate with that is violence. And for me, just training so much, position is the thing that I think about. It's like positioning is everything in combat. It's like optimal positioning. I mean, like, Ron, you and I play Warhammer a bit, don't we?
Yeah, Sport of Kings.
Yeah. Sport of absolutely. For only the most prestigious of gentlemen. Position is everything in that game. I mean, the optimal position is, literally how you score objectives, is placing yourself into position, and even over sometimes the destruction of the other army.
Yeah, but I'd say that's an element of like maybe all board games, right? Like any game that has a 3D element, right, is about positioning something to some extent. I'm struggling to think of a game that's like not, right? Like there's an old game that my family liked called Sequence, which is again about placing pieces on a board, and like maybe you could extrapolate that to some sort of war metaphor, but like that one disguises it very well if that was the case. So I'm wondering, like, anytime you are saying we're playing a board game, it's going to take place on this predefined space, it seems like positioning is just sort of inherent to that.
This is true. Yeah, I don't know if I necessarily can.
What about like card games?
That's where I was thinking. Is the board is what leads me to think map, positioning, and then movement. But
you have a card game called War.
Yeah, man. War is great.
Talk about strategy.
You want to play War?
War is so bad.
It's terrible.
That is arguably the worst card game ever, if you think about it, because it's just boring.
That's why it's a perfect metaphor.
Yeah.
No one should engage in war.
It is just attrition.
I wonder though, Ron, like, I mean, it's an existential question you're asking that I don't know if we wanted it to get this serious, but like the original, like, gaming was actual war. Like it was caveman tribe against caveman tribe. And it wasn't like, oh, let's board. Let's go.
Right.
Fight. It was about survival and about growing the tribe and about land acquisition. And it wasn't until later that we figured out that, hey, there's peaceful ways we can have combat. And so I think all competition is an emulation of game.
But you're also making it sound like it's also a channel by which we funnel a sort of primal urge.
Maybe, yeah.
Yeah. And Yeah, we need to get our fourth member.
The way Doug talks about backgammon, like talk about primal. Like,
it's primal urge to play backgammon in bed.
My wife and I have no more marital issues because we work it all out through backgammon. That's why we play. But yeah, I hadn't even thought that we were going to go this direction. But I mean, you're right. It's strange to think about because going back to this idea, there's several card games. Like I think of games where you build your deck or if there's combat, whatever the case, there are a lot that are just acquire points, you know, and before the other person. And so I'm actually starting to think, are there any games that are not either beat the other person through you have more or race? I almost think that I'm trying to think.
I mean, all the games that are fun have that. Like, I'm sure there must be some, like, you know, hipster, obscure, everyone gets a participation ribbon cooperative game for preschoolers, but I can't think of what it is.
Wow. It's the Game of Life. Remember that one? That was boring as hell.
But also competitive. Like, did you have the most money and the best life?
There's a sort of like bragging right at the end, right?
It's a race.
There's a whole genre of games that are trying to be less competitive, right? There's like an awareness in game design right now that like competition can for the people who lose creates a negative play experience, right? And so why would I want to be bad at a game for 2 hours? And so you're familiar, Doug, with like what's called a Euro game, which is like a school of game design that comes out of Europe that is kind of like, hey, what if we were all playing the same game, but none of us really like stabbed the other in the back or did like an aggressive move to another one. So you're kind of just four people stuck at a board playing your own version of a game. And these can be really rewarding, but I guess in a very different way. There's still a competition and that one person will be the winner at the end.
It's still a race though, because we're getting real into the tangentials here, but like if you're looking at a Euro game, which they centralize, if you're like, what does he even mean by this? I think like they center around not having combat. That's that's the commonality is like they're almost always, you're not going to backstab somebody or destroy their pieces. You are simply trying to build something yourself, but then it becomes a race. And so we're back to it's a race or it's combat. And I don't know. I didn't prepare this for this podcast, and now I'm ready to do a second episode as a follow-up already.
About your
are all games races and combat? And they might be. And what's interesting too about it thematically is I was thinking about this in the context of race, and I was thinking of video games. Yeah. And it's interesting that the one type of video game I can usually get anyone to play is like, I will go to Mario Kart every time. Yeah. That's like the most universal of, well, I can do a race. And I've found that with backgammon, it's a similar thing. When the second I explain that it's a race, people are willing to engage, that take that step down from, well, if we're not hurting each other, or I don't have to kill you at the end of this game, it seems to be what people are willing to engage in.
Yeah, maybe it's like a simplicity of objective, right?
Yeah.
How few words can you use to explain what you need to do? You need to get to this point faster than that guy. Yeah. You need to remove these pieces faster than the other guy.
Faster than the other. Yeah. So,
because any game that doesn't involve that is an activity, not a game.
It seems to be, because I'm even thinking about cooperative games, which is like a fairly new concept, I think. Mm-hmm. From what I know, I'm trying to think if there are any ancient examples of a cooperative game that you play against the game itself. I think this is a newer idea. And even that, it's usually a race against the board has certain objectives through like usually a card deck that you're burning through. And if you don't beat it in time or beat the waves of enemies, whatever it is, it still kind of follows that same thing.
It's like Jumanji. You're playing against the board.
That's right. Mm-hmm. And then you have to scream Jumanji when you win. Mm-hmm. And depending on your age.
Was that part of it?
Don't say it 3 times or Michael Keaton shows up. Like
No, now it's The Rock.
I was going to say, depending on your age, it's either Robin Williams or it's Dwayne The Rock Johnson, and hopefully it's Robin Williams. Sorry, Dwayne.
All right, so back to your point. So we were talking about Romans playing...
But you said when the Romans leave, the game leaves too?
So it's tables begins to fail away. And my book, so looking at It's All a Game here, Donovan writes, the former subjects of the Romans simply failed to embrace the game with the same vigor as their departed masters. And I think what's interesting is if the legionnaires are the ones playing the game mostly, I'm wondering if the soldiers and the fact that they're traveling and it's like, here's something to do. Here's a way to kind of blow off the steam of we may be in battle any day or we're holding back, we're holding back the Visigoths, whatever the case is. They're kind of looking at, I hope that I have my eras right.
Oh, Visigoths? Yeah, that's a Roman shit.
I got worried for a second. I went, wait, is it the Picts?
Yeah. That's both.
Arthurian? So, and speaking of that, so moving to the Crusades, if can we move to the Crusades?
I'd love to, yeah.
Oh, so, please.
Thank you. Christian soldiers during the Crusades are playing it so much during the Third Crusade. England's Richard I and King Philip of France issued a joint decree that banned anyone under the rank of knight from playing games for money and capped the sums that knights and clergymen could bet. Those who disobeyed faced being whipped naked through the army for 3 days. And I found this interesting because, one, they didn't outright ban it from certain groups, which means I'm curious how y'all take this, but like I almost imagine it was so popular that's like, we can't get them to stop, but we can whip them naked. It's like, it's just such a funny, I laughed so hard when I read that initially of like, well, the knights aren't going to stop, so we got to do something for them.
But people below the rank of knight were not allowed to play?
They're done.
So it's because of labor.
Yeah. That's my guess. Yeah. It's becoming so addictive. It's the Tamagotchi of its time.
And it's a very common medieval sort of law, right? Which is like,
if you're not a knight, you can't do anything.
Yeah. Like it's a time period and a culture that's very invested in class distinctions, right? Mm-hmm. So like some classes have to be very cool and others have to suck.
That's right. Yeah. And and I'm building this idea, but it's thematically something that we need to look at is backgammon an aristocratic game? Because that might be the case too. And we'll get into that. So Crusaders bring the game home with them, reviving this European interest in this. So royalty and aristocracy to people of no rank at inns are providing customers with boards, and the game of tables becomes common across Europe following the Crusades. We see this, and I take a pit stop here for Chaucer mentioning it in the Canterbury Tables, talking about dancers who played chess and tables at the time. And not everybody, of course, is pleased by this coming back. The Catholic Church is seeing the spread of this gambling game as something that needs to be banned. And King Louis IX moves to ban this in France in 1254. But for the most part, people are ignoring this disapproval. And it's interesting that there's usually, it seems that following gambling, there's always going to be a crackdown of like, but you shouldn't be from here. The Renaissance Europeans are playing this there's about 25 versions that are floating around at this time that are broadly similar with minor differences in scoring, how you bet, and what happens. And sometime around the 1640s, the British invent the idea that if you roll doubles, so if you roll a 3 and a 3, you don't just move 3 and 3, you double that amount. So you get to move 4 times in total.
Seems like a very British idea. It's like,
well, sure.
Doubling doubles.
If you happen to have a navy, then you can take 4 times the amount of the world.
Give me a little bit, I'll take it all.
Yeah.
And they also add this idea of a scoring system that you gain more points depending on how far back the player is when you win, which is where this new version that is officially titled Backgammon comes from.
Can we talk about that for a second?
Sure.
I don't know. You mentioned that this is a variation of the game, right? Mm-hmm. Where you can add a new element, which is, stop me if I'm wrong, the more you are winning, the more you win.
Yep.
Why would I want to play that version? Unless I'm like, unless I guess this is like, I'm a pro. Like,
I would think
just raising the stakes.
Yeah, you and I go $10 for a game. Sure. Now it's looking like it's going to be $20 for me, $30 for me, because I'm beating you this much. The stakes continue to raise, especially if there's gambling involved. I think that I want to win more is always going to be a part of that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But the
because the mentality going into the game isn't I'm going to lose more because I'm going to suck so much. It's that it's an opportunity to win more because of my luck and skill.
And I guess it's also corrective, right? Because this effect doesn't take place until the next game, right? So it's like, if I lost that one, well, now I'm going to raise the stakes so that I can win back what I lost in the next match.
It's possible. Yeah. So the two ways, and this is getting ahead a bit, but generally, if you're not playing for money, people are playing for a certain amount of points. And so people are looking at, I made this many points in this game, or I made up these many points as we're playing. But a gambler, yeah, they would be like, I just lost 3 times the amount I expected. I'd love to play again so I can try to win this back. Yeah. Okay. So gambling element is going to play a factor.
But it also changes the gameplay too, because this is what happens in cribbage. And I know you know nothing about this because you don't play any worthwhile games, but
sorry, listeners.
Get on me and Don's level, Doug, and learn cribbage.
Okay. Cribbers or whatever you are called.
There's a psychological element to it as well, because if I'm playing a game and I'm like, there's a moment in backgammon where you realize you're probably not going to win.
Yeah.
Same thing as true in cribbage. But if I'm losing in backgammon and I want to prevent getting backgammoned, I can try to focus my strategy on just moving my back pieces forward so that way I don't lose as badly, even though I'm going to lose.
Okay, correct. Sure. It opens up new objectives.
Yeah.
Like, okay.
And when we get to the 1920s, the roaring 20s, when we get there, we're going to talk about the doubling cube as well, which basically adds a would you like I raise you element to this game, like in the similar to Texas Hold'em, which can end the game immediately if somebody doesn't want to take a double, and we'll get into that. But yeah, this is called backgammon, and the name is derived from the words back and game. And in 1743, Edmund Hoyle, the famous English chronicler of card and board games, coded the rules that largely endure today. Have we seen the name Hoyle before?
No.
He's the guy that wrote the rules to cribbage.
Oh, well.
Hoyle's got his finger in every pot.
He really does. But yeah, many a card deck that you'll find in the store still has a name on it.
Oh, really?
Okay. Oh, yeah, absolutely.
That's sick.
Yeah, Hoyle was way big when it came to kind of codifying a lot of the pub games that you see and like the classics. And I would argue it'd be interesting to look into Hoyle's life. I'm wondering if a lot of the reason that the games that we play are what they are is because like Hoyle kind of compiled them in a sense.
Sort of a Brothers Grimm of board games, right?
Yeah.
He's also the source of the idiom to play according to Hoyle. It means to like actually follow the rules.
I was not aware of that idiom, and I'm going to start using that.
Yeah, play according to Hoyle.
I like that a lot. But only Hoyle's games? Or can I say that about it?
You can say that about anything, but I mean, it's originally because he wrote the rules to the.
I just want to make sure I have my idioms right. Mm-hmm. That's it. Yeah. Who do you think are some famous folks going into our past the 1700s? Who do you think are some famous folks?
Ben Franklin.
Angelina Jolie.
Yeah. Angelina. Bradgelina. Really.
Who's the dictionary guy? Sam, what's his name?
I get the impression that Ben Franklin is probably not patient enough for backgammon.
But he's like a dilettante.
We're close.
I would say Jefferson.
Yes. Oh. So Thomas Jefferson.
Because he's going to use it in France to flirt.
I thought Ben Franklin was flirting.
Yeah.
I thought they were all flirting in France.
I call him Frankie Flirt, but some people call him the one with glasses. Yeah. So Thomas Jefferson, but he wrote about playing it during breaks between writing the Declaration of Independence. Mm-hmm. Admiral John Jervis, not quite as famous, but of the British Royal Navy, complained that surgeons of the Horatio Nelson's fleet wasted too much time on the game. And Jane,
that's why he died.
Yeah, he's out of there. That's right. And Jane Austen's Emma played it with her hypochondriac father as well. So yeah, we see that again. I find it interesting, right? Because you've got these different eras, and again, it's popping back up. And this brings us, we're skipping ahead a bit, but there's this more contemporary time where it really becomes popular in the 60s, 70s, kind of at its peak of tournament popularity in the 80s, and then followed by a decline. And there is a man who is responsible for this named Alexis Obolensky. Familiar with that name?
Yeah, playing by Obolinski.
It's a different type of playing, I'll tell you that, because our man did a lot for the game of backgammon at the time, but he was he came from aristocratic stock. He was born in 1914, blue-blooded family, respected member of the Tsarist Russian high society and descendants of the Rurik dynasty. I will be honest that I don't know my Russian dynasties as much, but man, does he sound important. The important thing is he comes from money here, and this is going to get back into our aristocratic, like, is this a game for aristocrats? Russian Revolution hits. This brings communist Bolsheviks to power, and the Obolinski family flees the country. They wind up in Istanbul, and what game do you think little Alexis is taught in that country?
Whatever backgammon in Russian is.
Cribbage. That's right. Absolutely. He was taught cribbage, and I always knew what it was. So you guys suck. No, no, he definitely, he was taught backgammon by their Turkish gardener, and he developed his passion for the game. They relocated to New York. He was notorious for his kind of playboy lifestyle, notorious womanizer and drinker. And his favorite thing to do was essentially set up shop and teach people backgammon. It's weird to think about this because, like, I like backgammon, but it's like, it seems like his life's goal was he wanted to make it a cultural phenomenon using his influence and money. And so he literally starts trying to establish himself with celebrities in New York and surrounding by starting to throw parties where you can gamble and play backgammon. And to a certain degree, this is a success. As he's kind of jet setting around, as he's acquired more and he's doing this, hotel opens up in the Bahamas in the 1950s, and he convinces them successfully, I can bring wealthy people here to play this game. They will drink in your bars. They will occupy your rooms. They will run up gigantic tabs as long as you let me play this game. And I guess I'm shocked by this because, again, I started this episode with this is your grandma's game, but this guy looked at it as this is the high life. Like this is what you do if you're an absolute baller.
My grandmother was a swinger in the 50s. Like, this would be right up the alley. They'd be playing the backgammon and dipping the fondue all in the same. Right, that's a
parlor game. Would we call it a parlor game?
I think we would. Because
you're right. There is, like, some games have a mystique, a connotation of class, and
yes,
and like cribbage is one of them, or like bridge, right? Like these kinds of like older
bridge has an esoteric, like there's a secret knowledge. Like you either are a bridge player or else it's just a mystery.
Yep,
like it's a. And I think backgammon's a little bit like, I think it has that mystique to it, but there's a chink in that wall.
Yeah.
Right. Like it's a lot more accessible than bridge. Like bridge has a much more, it's a longer initiation period. So a harder learning curve, I think.
And hold on to that idea. You keep setting me up, gentlemen. It's as if and for the
we've gotten pretty good at this podcasting thing.
It's freaking me out. We are going to come back to bridge players because they are going to be mentioned. There's a wave of bridge players who end up getting into backgammon, but throws this tournament. I wanted to throw one of the highlights of one of the tournaments. So March 1964, he invites a gaggle of counts, millionaires, stockbrokers, and socialites to this hotel in the Bahamas. They begin to play, and the tournament, as it is described in the book, is a sun-kissed party, lubricated by drinks on the house and soundtracked by the constant rattle of dice shakers. The final game saw New York publisher Porter Ijams up against Charles Wacker III. What a name. A millionaire racehorse breeder from Chicago who later became a fugitive after the FBI accused him of tax evasion worth millions of dollars. The stake was nearly $8,000, around $60,000 in today's money, and the silver Obolinski Cup. Wacker won the game, and after he and those who bet on his success had collected their winnings, because a big part of this too was you were betting on who you thought would win. So even those that are not participating are throwing money around with side bets of, I think Whacker's got it. I put 200.
I'm a whacker guy.
I'm kind of a whacker guy myself. So the Backgammon Glitterati wound down to the black tie celebration that featured games played for even greater stakes and concluded with a swim at sunrise. And you can imagine this, right? Like it's 1954. Oh, yeah. I'm thinking of the show Mad Men right now. Like I'm just imagining Don Draper's at the pool like, I see you're playing backgammon. Yeah. I advertised sets for FAO Schwartz for them once. But this celebrity event leads into the 60s to where you can look up images, and the person I'm thinking of is like, if you look up either Mick Jagger, from the Rolling Stones playing backgammon, or Hugh Hefner, there are just truthfully like hundreds of images. Like this became the thing that people were doing. And as these parties kind of started to go into full swing, the Playboy Mansion is hosting them. It becomes a significant thing in the 60s that becomes a cultural standpoint. Sales of backgammon boards become absolutely like outrageous to the point that Abercrombie and Fitch in their 1974, so it's ahead a little bit, but by the 70s, the 1974 edition catalog for Abercrombie and Fitch has a full page spread of just like 25 different sets that you can buy with different logos and patterns. People are doing luxury leather sets that you can buy. And even to this day, I don't know if you know, but you can go like Gucci makes a set that is worth thousands of dollars that has their imprinting on the side. So
Don, I think Doug is just trying to convince us he's cool for playing backgammon.
He didn't bring the Gucci set over today to play.
Gentlemen, you're misplaced here. I'm actually asking for my Christmas present today, so if you can get as many people to donate as possible. Can you imagine owning that? Like, all right, we're going to play on the $6,000 set. Put the drinks away. Like, I mean, it's like you're playing with gloves. Oh, I couldn't even imagine it. Personally,
I guess that's not so uncommon though, right? Like there is a certain degree to which board games become art objects, right? Like I'm more familiar with like all the different expensive chess sets you can buy, right? Like these ones are carved out of crystal and stuff. Like there is a and there is a sort of status that certain games command that others don't, right? Like no one's selling that I'm aware of a crystal Monopoly set, right?
You'd be wrong.
And maybe a Monopoly is like past that threshold, but I mean, can you get Sorry made out of obsidian or something? Like
I'm making it right now.
Dragon glass.
Introducing Sorry, or Parcheesi, as Don said. Cribbage. Yeah, definitely. There's got to be, I would think, because as much as I don't know cribbage, I know that wood track that it's on. And cribbage does it emulates horse racing, correct? Isn't that the reason?
Yeah.
It is also a racing game. Yeah, I would imagine that they've got some very deluxe sets. I think the simplicity of it lends to it. But yeah, you're right.
But also, like, if I may invite you to carry out a thought experiment, I want you to imagine in your mind a international chess tournament. All right?
Yes.
You and the audience now have a picture in your mind.
I do.
Okay, and now erase that image and now replace it with an international Magic the Gathering tournament.
It smells different immediately.
Right? Yeah, like you're picturing a different crowd. You're picturing a different level of opulence, probably. Is one of those games marginally better or more difficult to play? I would say they're fairly equal. I think Magic is also a confusing and very tactically difficult game to wrap your head around and master. Yeah. But yeah, one of them is sort of the game of kings, and the other is the game of schlubs.
The game of needing deodorant.
Yeah,
that's right.
But part of that, I think, has to do with the material that is required to play the game. Like you can't upscale the Magic the Gathering cards. The cards are just the cards. Like they don't make the set that's made out of walnut. You know that.
Right.
It just. I don't know if that has anything to do with it, but I mean, like, I can't imagine what a fancy Magic the Gathering would be like, as opposed to, like, you can make chess.
What a
fancy.
wonderful grammatically correct sentence. You just
Well, and We're obviously veering off into other territory talking about Magic, but that is an interesting thing because it is Magic the Gathering, the collectible card game.
Yeah.
There's something very consumer about that game as well, which is you got to keep buying the cards to make the best deck possible. Whereas Backgammon was once drawn in the dirt, and now we take this set that is luxury.
Play it anywhere.
And I think part of the allure, and again, this goes with it. Obviously, what I'm describing right now is it becomes a fad in the 60s and 70s as something that is celebrity. If you could see Mick Jagger playing, I mean, it's like product placement, right? Like if they're playing it, everybody should be playing it.
But it's also not anyone's product.
Correct. Right? That's what's interesting about this to me is it's not necessarily selling something. It becomes you are a backgammon player, which suggests something about you. And what I find interesting about this is it's popped up in all of these different centuries as something that we went from Legionnaires playing it to Mick Jagger's got a game in the back for you, and it's like, I'm just fascinated by this because, again, there's also a famous image of Lucille Ball, like with a cigarette, like screaming and like looking across the room because she was such a huge fan of playing it. Tournaments are named after her. That it is fun enough that the celebrity elites are wanting to do this because they want to gamble, blow off some steam and do something that's fun. But it is kind of sexy enough that it's like, I want to be a part of that. We should get a backgammon set for the house. And I think that's why it's still around, at least in the cultural contemporary, is it's kind of an offshoot from this time.
Well, and I'm trying to trace this history, because I mean, backgammon is fun, but boil it down to its essence, and it's really not a very exciting game.
No,
it's the same every time you play, like
chess.
It's the same game over and over again, and sometimes the numbers fall your way, and sometimes they don't, and it's not like, that was the best game backgammon ever. Like they all kind of have the same tone.
Yeah.
Right. And so when you're describing the history of the Romans playing the game, and then like when they start to wither, that it's not really picked up by their servants, but if the game doesn't go away, and why is that? And so I'm thinking, right, there's a little bit of a sense in some game history that aristocrats liked strategy games, and backgammon is definitely a game of strategy, but lower classes like games of luck that you don't have to know as much, and you don't have to have education. In backgammon, you don't even have to know how to read to play backgammon. You don't even have to know your numbers to play backgammon. You just count the numbers on the die. So it has like this crossover. Of it has access for the aristocrats and interesting levels of strategy, but also access to lower classes that are looking for entertainment that is just based on luck.
And what this is kind of like the final piece of information that is brought to us in this book, but bridge players and mathematicians, and there's crossover because it's very much statistical analysis. What ends up apparently like the peak of backgammon gaming was in 1984, 1985 tournaments in Monte Carlo. You can still go on YouTube and like see footage, like hours long, of just how high class this is at the time. And what ends up killing it and bringing this out is bridge players and mathematicians from colleges invade these tournaments because the money becomes so big. Like we're looking at $500,000 at a tournament. These mathematicians invade, and what happens is they are sitting on turns after a roll for sometimes up to a half hour. Like they will sit there and analyze every permutation of everything that they can do before they make a decision. And they do not, it's just killing the idea of this fun that is associated there. And so there's a steady decline that happens after that, and backgammon kind of starts to fade into obscurity again because the over analysts kind of take over the fun element that you're talking about right there.
Math ruins everything.
It does seem to. It really does. It's important for budgeting, but that seems to be, it. And budgets aren't fun, just in case our listeners didn't know. So I think you might be right there. If once that magic is taken away and now it's just simple statistical analysis of I have a 32% chance, the next game that pops up as being the most popular, especially amongst gambling circles, is Texas Hold'em. And still to this day, Texas Hold'em generally is the number one gambling game, at least for public perception, that exists. And backgammon kind of falls into decline. And so, Don, you kind of hit on this of what is the magic that holds this thing that, again, it would be a fad if I could attach it to a decade. Even if I could attach it to 100 years, I would still consider it a fad. But it's popped up so many times from being a game that you can inscribe in the dirt, and we find in ancient Mesopotamia. So, I mean, essentially it's as old as myth, right? And now it's still here popping up in different variations with a different color. And then here I am, playing it with my wife before we go to bed. It's fascinating to me that it would show up in all of these different ways.
Mm-hmm. I guess there's like this seems like things that survive for a very long time have some sort of fundamental, distill in some effective, seemingly simplistic way, like a fundamental human fascination or, like certain stories, right? You can take these story tropes or arcs reoccur across all cultures, right? Across time, because they distill some sort of human question, fascination, obsession into story form, and they just sort of appeal to all people. And I think people have always played games, I think, once they had the time to stop surviving and play games, because our brains, I think, are very oriented towards problem solving. And then we were talking about the competition element. I guess for me, competition just adds a stake. It adds a reason to play, right? The reason is sometimes it applies to or tickles a person's ego, right? Or their sense of getting better at something, right? An accomplishment of some degree. And so, it seems like backgammon, like you said, probably not the most fun game that's ever been made, but simplistic enough that you can...
the greatest game of all time.
Simplistic enough that you can play it, like you said, anywhere, right? Has... there's probably also something that should be not overlooked, but like a kind of imperialist history that has carried it to different reaches of the globe, right? And has kind of planted the seed in all these different places, right? You mentioned the two bit, like Rome and Britain, the people that love this. So of course it wound up everywhere, right?
Yeah.
And so there's that kind of sort of material element to it. How did it actually get there? I'm sure there are more fun games than backgammon, but they have been lost, right?
But it's that there's a democratic element in it. So the idea you're talking about, the trope, so what's the trope of backgammon, right? That as a lower class person that would attract me to this game. Well, it's that I can win the game.
Yeah.
Right. And you take any Joe Blow off the street and you put them up against a regular chess player. It doesn't have to be a champion chess player, just a regular chess player. Like, they're not going to win that game.
Yeah.
But in backgammon, like you mentioned earlier, Doug, like you can go up against the most famous, most successful backgammon player, and they will have the bad day on the dice, and the game flips the other way.
Yeah, and what a heroic moment!
And you can turn the tables on them.
Yeah, look at him! Look at him! And something, it's interesting. You brought up like the imperialist bent on it, and something that I definitely should have mentioned earlier is area that it is most popular in still today, like Iran, Israel, like these areas that like centered around like probably where the spread of ancient Mesopotamia, like the game is still most popular where its ancient roots are. And I find that also really interesting too, that's like, it's a cultural standpoint for them as well. And so it's just
because we haven't brought them cribbage yet.
That's good luck, buddy. Good luck, because backgammon is where it's at.
Teach the GIs cribbage.
That's right. Yeah. The classic two-player. Yeah. Sitting across the table, two players, just be able to battle it out with a couple of small pieces and a board shape. It's just as simple as it is, as grandma as it might seem from the beginning of this. I find it fascinating that, you can bring anybody into it, and it creates this dynamic that is universal to life experience. Yeah.
Very cool.
Thank you so much for letting me wax a bit on backgammon, and hopefully this starts the revival. I'm looking forward to seeing across the world the next great revival of backgammon in homes, pubs.
I think we need to start it. It needs to be the uncanny backgammon extravaganza in Nassau.
Look at
with fondue and
Absolutely.
beehive hairdos and cigarettes.
First Uncanacon.
Look out for your customized Uncannery backgammon set with all of our faces plastered on it in order to continue to raise money from there. But thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you, Doug.
Thank you, Doug.